Okay, I want you to imagine stepping off a boat onto a vibrant shoreline. Except today, if you were to set foot in what used to be the Aral Sea, all you'd feel is salt, dust, and toxic sand just crunching under your boots. In just a few short decades, one of the absolutely largest lakes on Earth practically vanished, turning into a harsh desert. We're going to explore exactly how that happened, the massive human cost of it all, and whether or not parts of this lost sea are actually coming back to life.
So let's dive right into this massive mystery. We really have to ask, how exactly does a body of water almost twice the size of Belgium just vanish into dust? I mean, it sounds like complete science fiction, right? But this was a reality entirely engineered by human decisions. It's kind of like a giant puzzle, where agriculture, economics, and ecology collided in just spectacular fashion.
The contrast here is just absolutely staggering. The Aral Sea used to be teeming with life. We're talking about vibrant waters full of carp, bream, and other fish. Entire communities lived along the shores, making their whole living from fishing and sailing across this vast expanse. Compare that to the present day. It's reduced to this incredibly toxic landscape of salt and dust, sitting at barely 10% of its original size. The sheer scale of this loss is honestly hard to wrap your head around.
Section 1. The Lost Desert Sea. To truly grasp what was lost, we really need to look at the baseline before human intervention changed the whole game. For thousands of years, this enormous lake thrived right in the middle of a dry Central Asian desert. It maintained its immense size because it was fed naturally by two mighty rivers, the Amu Darya in the south and the Sur Darya in the northeast. Now, historically, the sea wasn't totally static. It experienced natural cycles. Sometimes the Amu Darya would shift away, the lake would shrink a bit, but eventually the river would shift back and the Aral Sea would fully recover. It was this beautiful, self-sustaining natural equilibrium.
Section 2. The White Gold Mistake.
But that thousands of years old equilibrium was completely shattered in the early 1960s by a single monumental human decision, the push for cotton, which was dubbed the white gold boom. The plan was highly ambitious. They wanted to grow cotton on a massive scale and export it to the world. And for a short while, it honestly seemed like a perfect economic miracle, bringing in some serious, real money. But there was a massive oversight. Cotton is incredibly thirsty. So, growing it in a notoriously dry region set the stage for an unprecedented environmental disaster.
Now, this didn't happen overnight. It was more of a slow build to a tragedy. It started with that self-sustaining natural cycle we talked about, but after the 1960s cotton boom began, everything just accelerated. By 1988, the plan seemed to be a resounding success, as Uzbekistan actually became one of the world's absolute largest cotton exporters. But fast forward to 2007, and the consequence was undeniable. The sea had shrunk to an unbelievable 10% of its original size.
10%. Again, it is genuinely hard to wrap your head around a drop that massive. And the reason? Thirsty crops and terrible infrastructure. To feed those thirsty cotton seeds, water from the Amu Darya and Syr Darya was aggressively diverted into desert irrigation canals. And it wasn't just cotton, actually. Farmers were also growing water-heavy crops like melons and rice, which, if you think about it, is highly ironic for a desert environment. Plus, the canals were built so poorly that massive amounts of water simply leaked out or evaporated in the dry heat before ever reaching a single crop. The rivers simply couldn't replenish the sea fast enough. Section 3. An ecological collapse.
What's truly terrifying is the horrific chain reaction triggered once the water started to vanish. First, as the diverted rivers failed to replenish the lake, the water evaporated and the sea fragmented into three smaller, hyper-salty bodies of water. This extreme salt basically choked out the fish that couldn't survive the new harsh conditions. Meanwhile, years of agricultural runoff meant pesticides and chemicals were hyper-concentrating on the newly exposed, completely dry seabed. And finally, the wind effectively weaponized this dried-out lakebed, lifting toxic dust into the air and carrying it straight into nearby towns and fields.
I mean, imagine the wind picking up, and instead of just normal dust, it's blowing agricultural chemicals straight into your town. This toxic dust invaded every single part of daily life. People were constantly breathing it in. It settled into the local drinking water. It landed on the crops, which were then eaten by local livestock, allowing these harsh chemicals to slowly make their way straight into the human food supply. Because fresh water became incredibly scarce, widespread health crises just erupted. Local communities were suddenly plagued by severe breathing issues, stomach problems, anemia, and chronic infections.
The sheer desperation of the situation was unimaginable. In the worst areas, farmers actually had to wash the land again and again just to clear away the salt and chemicals. The wind was dropping thick layers of salt right onto their fields, causing crops to struggle or fail completely. It's an incredibly tragic irony, right? The very farming industry that drained the sea to grow crops was eventually choked out by the salty, toxic desert soil it had created itself. In the long run, the massive cotton plant basically defeated itself.
Section 4. The cost of recovery.
So, we know the science. Simply letting fresh water flow down from the melting snow and glaciers in the eastern mountains would help rebuild the lake. But we are faced with an almost impossible geopolitical dilemma. 5 different countries depend on this exact same water for survival, but for completely different reasons. On one side, you have Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan desperately needing that river water to run their dams and generate electricity. On the other side, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan heavily rely on canal irrigation to sustain their farms, their cotton exports, and really their entire local economies. Fully restoring the Ural Sea would mean taking water away from all these vital economic engines for decades.
Faced with that impossible gridlock, we really have to ask a profound question. If we have the power to create an ecological disaster of this scale, do we possess the ability to undo it? Can an environment that collapsed this terribly ever really bounce back? Well, the answer is we don't fully know yet, but there are some incredible sparks of hope.
In 2005, we actually got one of those sparks. Kazakhstan decided to take action, building an 8-meter-long dike to stabilize a section known as the North Aral Sea. And the results? They were phenomenal. Just 2 years after it was built, the water levels actually started to rise. The salt concentration dropped, and amazingly, fish like carp, saber, and pike perch actually began swimming in those waters again.
Meanwhile, Uzbekistan is doing something that sounds almost surreal. They're planting millions of trees directly across a barren ocean bed. They're using sack soil trees, which are these incredibly tough, desert-hardy plants. Their deep roots grab onto the earth, helping to hold the soil in place and significantly reducing those devastating toxic sandstorms. It just goes to show that nature can be surprisingly resilient when we just give it a chance to breathe and recover.
Section 5. A global cautionary tale.
But despite those amazing localized successes we just talked about, the underlying problem hasn't disappeared. Farmers in Central Asia still grow massive amounts of water-intensive crops. Until the region shifts to crops that require less water, like winter wheat or drought-resistant vegetables, full restoration is still generations away. And unfortunately, the Aral Sea is not an isolated incident. Blaring alarm bells are ringing around the rest of the world. Take Lake Chad in Central Africa. It's been shrinking dramatically since the 1960s. Or over in Southern California, the Salton Sea is getting saltier and saltier due to very similar local irrigation problems. These bodies of water are facing the exact same existential threats that destroyed the Aral Sea.
As we wrap up this explainer, the Aral Sea's partial recovery serves as a critical textbook for our future. The ultimate question we're left with is, will humanity learn from the dust of the Aral Sea, or will we keep draining our planet dry before the damage goes too far? That's the challenge we face next.